Hello, I'm Matthew Stepanek.
And I'm Rayanne Haynes.
And this is Let's Get Lit. In every episode, we interview poets of stature about their work and about the power and relevancy of poetry in order to support and promote it, the arts, and literacy. In a conversational style, we'll enjoy a glass of wine, chosen to match the poet's personality and style, while learning more about each poet and asking why poetry matters to them. And hopefully, as the podcast progresses, we'll be able to maintain our composure as we move closer to some form of bacchanal truth.
Yes.
Also, we would like to acknowledge our interview takes place on Treaty 6 territory, a traditional gathering place for diverse Indigenous peoples, including the Cree, Saulteaux, Blackfoot, Métis, Papiss-Chase, Nakota Sioux, and many others whose histories, languages, and cultures continue to influence our vibrant community.
Mm-hmm.
So, I'm Matthew Stepanek, the editor of Glass Buffalo and one co-host of Let's Get Lit.
And I'm Rayanne Haynes, the executive director of the Edmonton Poetry Festival and the other co-host of Let's Get Lit. We would like to thank our wine expert, Gurvinder Bhatia, for his generosity as the podcast wine sponsor. Our pairings come from Gurvinder's private cellar.
And Let's Get Lit is presented with the Writers Guild of Alberta, and we're grateful for their support in promoting and sharing this podcast. As you're listening, feel free to share your thoughts on the conversation with us on Twitter at @lets_lit.
Mm-hmm.
So today we are joined by Kelly Shepard,
Yay.
who has worked as a kindergarten teacher in South Korea and a construction worker in northern Alberta, and those feel like opposites, polar opposites. So we'll be seeing a lot of opposites.
We might.
Combining today. Yeah. His first full-length poetry collection, Shift, was published by Thistledown Press in 2016 and longlisted for the Edmonton Public Library's People's Choice Award in 2017. He has written 6 poetry chapbooks, most recently A Hidden Bench from the Alfred Gustav Press in 2017. And originally from Smithers, British Columbia, Kelly lives in Edmonton, and he is the poetry editor for the environmental philosophy journal, The Trumpeter.
Pretty cool.
Yeah. And so tonight we're going to be discussing Kelly's most recent collection, Insomnia Bird, which, as the publisher describes, is a cartography and a geography of Edmonton. The poems which shift between short individual lyric pieces and found text emulate a black-billed magpie's nest with the subject matter and also physically with the words and lines. The poems generate the theme of home, the bird's nest, the city, and not feeling at home, sleeping, and the inability to sleep. The magpie, the insomnia bird, is the protagonist and the muse, the thread that connects everything to everything else in this work. And while Kelly's poems are at times critical of Edmonton's automobile culture and urban sprawl, his tone remains ironic rather than moralizing, and he is consistent in his use of dark humor to avoid being didactic. With such guidance, the poems effectively disclose what is not seen, what is repressed, what lies behind the scenes in the city he shares with magpies. And a lot going on here, so lots to discuss tonight.
Welcome, Kelly.
Oh, welcome.
Thank you.
We're happy to have you with us.
Thank you for inviting me.
You're very welcome.
Hopefully you don't regret it at any point.
No, hopefully not. I don't think you will.
And he fell silent.
He was about to drink a glass of wine.
No regrets so far.
Okay. Okay, so tonight's wine, we'll jump to that. Tonight's wine has been selected with Kelly specifically in mind. And he is currently sipping on the wine without knowing what it is, so we get to share. So, in homage to Kelly, our selection for tonight's wine comes from a winery in the heart of the Okanagan Valley. We're drinking a 2014 Cabernet Franc from the Burrowing Owl Estate Winery. And in a twist, for me, the selection of this wine also relates directly to the magpie in Kelly's collection, Insomnia Bird. Owls and magpies are 2 of the most iconic winged creatures in the prairies, and there are few rural residents, hunters, or vacationing city dwellers who have not either observed these magnificent birds in the woods or listened on a still evening to their legendary hoots and calls. So the wine itself has a ripe, yet elegant and complex range of floral violet notes, 5 spices, sage, plum, black cherry, and licorice with a subtle hint of dark chocolate infused with orange zest. And we all kind of went, oh, this is really good when we tasted it. And so we feel like Kelly's poetry has that same ripe and complex notes with subtle hints of texture lingering just below the surface.
Nice. Oh, thank you.
All right. So cheers.
Cheers, yeah. Ding.
Bing.
And like there's a sip. It's all just like, what is this? The coldest day of the year in Edmonton?
Oh,
Today?
yeah. Yeah, it's currently, well, yesterday was minus 39 degrees Celsius. And I'm not sure what tonight is, but it's right up there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
we're all kind of like suffering, and I don't know, Kelly, how have you been surviving the cold?
I've been putting on lots of layers and complaining.
Complaining? I've heard that generates heat in the body.
It does.
Yeah.
It does.
You can. I don't know. We never get used to this cold in Edmonton, even though, because I feel like I wasn't personally prepared for it because we've been promised a mild winter.
Yes.
And this is not mild. This is a lie.
And it has been mild, though.
Yeah.
We've gotten totally spoiled, right?
Yeah.
Because in a way, this is not an unusual Edmonton winter. Right?
Yes.
No, right
It's
now,
just like,
the
right
super
now, this
cold
is super
normal.
cold is normal.
Yeah.
We've just gotten used to these quite mild
Yeah.
last
Yeah.
couple of years, I think.
I know I've been saying to people that all winter, like, we're pretty spoiled. I haven't shoveled much. You know, normally I'm out shoveling or forcing my children to go out and shovel with much more consistency.
I live in a condo building, so I'm mostly just like, why hasn't anyone shoveled yet?
Oh,
That's my complaining phrase, especially when I'm walking with my corgi, and it's just like if we're going through some sort of slush puddle or something, I'm just like, he's gonna be dirty after.
and he has really short legs.
Yeah.
Yeah, and Bella, my dog, also has very short legs.
Yeah.
But she loves this weather, and I won't let her go outside for a walk the last couple of days, and she's very distraught. Like, she's so upset with me. She's, like, mad as hell, and she's not going to take it anymore.
She's gonna drink water very loudly while mommy's trying to record her podcast in rebellion.
Yeah,
That's what happens.
yeah.
That's interesting because like Bob does not put up with me taking him outside for this. Like we'll get only like outside for like 2 minutes, and then he will just turn around and like wait for me to also turn around. Like he refuses to move forward. He's like, it's too cold. We're not gonna live through this.
Do you have a dog, Kelly?
I don't.
No.
Do you have a cat?
I do not.
You talk a lot about animals, but you don't have animals in
I
your
don't.
life.
I currently live in a no pets building, and
Oh.
it's my only complaint about where I live.
Do you want a pet?
I would like a pet at
Yeah.
some point. I have had pets. I grew up with pets and so
Yeah.
on, but I don't right now.
Yeah, one of your poems where you talk about the dog and the... You're not going to read it tonight, but I have to...
But you really like that one.
Gosh,
I
that
remember.
poem. You've never heard this, Matthew. You're going to have to hear this poem from Kelly at some point. And
Okay.
it's a poem about the dog, and the farmer puts the dog in the pig pen, and then the farmer... Yeah.
No.
You're already
It's-
gasping.
No.
It's
'cause I
not.
know what-
It's not from this book. It's
No.
from Shift.
Oh, we do have... I have the shift book here.
We'll get
We
Kelly
might
to do
actually
a
get
private
you-
performance for me.
Okay.
Later. That's not for
It-
listeners. That's
it-
extra content.
Yeah, the
If you
first
wanna-
time I heard you read that poem, I think that was when I kind of went, oh my God. And I actually gasped out loud in the middle of your reading. I don't know if you remember that, but people turned and stared at
Really?
me. Yes.
I actually don't remember that, but
You don't realize this effect that you have on people, that you leave them like horrified.
Because it was just like you knew what was coming, and you're like, no.
it's a true story.
I know,
it's
that's why-
it's a couple of true stories kind of condensed into one narrative, but the couple of episodes in it all did happen.
Yeah, and the way
So-
you read it is really, really good. Like, you're very just kind of calm with no emotion, and then to the you're where you pause or you phrase is so well done that it, like, I think I've heard you read it 3 times now, and
right.
or 4 times, and I'm just like, every time that poem kicks me
Wow.
right in the gut.
That's
Yeah.
very kind in a weird
Well,
way. That's a weird
way.
that's a weird thing to say, but
Yeah.
Well, I was just gonna say that's an interesting thing to say, that like, oh, like there's like Kelly kind of has to like separate the emotion from the poem
Yeah.
when he's reading it, because I wonder if you feel that poem while you're reading it, if you can make it through it, or I don't know if you can comment on that.
It's sort of in the voice of like this somewhat gruff old farmer guy. That's the narrator of it, and so it is a bit detached. He's not going to get broken up about anything. He's sort of just telling this story like
Yeah.
yeah. I hadn't actually thought about separating myself from it in that way, but that's interesting.
But I think that's part of what makes it so powerful is because it does have that detached sense of reality almost, of, you know, like that not feeling it, that this just happened.
And people like Patrick Lane,
Yeah.
it's sort of inspired by that kind of thing, right? His often just like horrifying images and events that he's talking about, but just in this completely like, I don't know, not necessarily deadpan, but just he's not being emotional. He's not drawing attention to this. He's just letting it speak for itself.
Yeah.
I think that's that's an interesting technique, I think. So
I agree.
So I'm glad to hear that I've somewhat got a little bit of that. So thank you.
Yes.
We're gonna talk
Everybody's going to be like, what is this poem she's talking about?
That's true.
I know. We might have to get you to read it. I think I'm going to put a plug in right now for at the end of the podcast, we'll get Kelly to read that poem.
I like that change.
Okay.
I'm for
Sure.
that. Yeah.
You're good with that, Kelly?
Sure.
You're okay with that?
Yeah.
Okay.
You have. I don't have a copy of that book yet.
Yeah, I have the book.
Okay.
I have the book.
Yeah.
Okay. Do you have any exciting projects on the horizon? I mean, the book has just come out, so that's kind of like the exciting project. But do you have other stuff coming up?
I have another chapbook coming out in the summer in June.
Wow.
Also with the Alfred Gustav Press, who have done a couple of mine now. In June. So it's still a little ways away. It feels like a long ways away yet.
Does it?
Well,
Probably because it's minus 59,000 degrees outside right
yes,
now.
Yes. June doesn't seem like a reality right now. But yeah, so that's exciting.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
So have you made that public yet, or?
Oh,
or are
shoot.
you
I
doing
guess
it
I just
now?
did. I guess I just did.
Yay! We're the first to know.
A Let's Get Let
Scoop.
exclusive.
So Gustav Press, you submitted, and it's a chapbook. So that's. Why don't you explain to people what a chapbook is? Because not everybody will know.
Okay. I believe maybe one of you will know more about this than me, but I think the name chapbook comes from. I think it used to be called a cheap book. Like I think it comes from cheap, because I think they used to. It was a really, really cheap and easy, almost sort of like do-it-yourself press a long time ago. I think maybe in England, and they would distribute literature this way by selling it, printing it and selling it very cheaply.
Yeah.
And so it would be like an essay length or a lecture length or a small collection of poetry or whatever. I think that's where it comes from originally.
Yeah.
And it's actually a pretty big thing in Canadian poetry, right? Like there's a lot of Canadian chapbook presses, fine art chapbooks, and short story chapbooks, and so on.
And what's it been like working with like the Alfred Gustav Press? Because I'm like, where are they located?
In Vancouver.
In Vancouver? Oh, okay.
It's actually David Zeroth, if you know him, the Vancouver, obviously, based poet. He's been around for quite a while. It's his own sort of personal press. It's kind of unique in that you can't find them in any stores. It's only subscriptions.
Yeah.
So people subscribe to it. And it's I don't remember the numbers right now, but it's quite inexpensive. But he does, I think, 2 sets of chapbooks a year. And so you get, I think, 3 or 4 chapbooks in the mail from all different people. A little set each time.
Yeah.
So
I think that's a great idea.
It's a really neat idea.
Yeah.
And so it's supported, at least in part, by the subscriptions, right? Like that.
Right.
So he'd only print as many as like he's got subscribers for that amount.
Yeah.
Oh, so he's not out trying to put them in, bookstores or anything like that. And then the poets get a certain number of copies for themselves that they can use. Yeah.
So it's a neat model, right? It's kind of an unusual. Instead of trying to just put out stacks and try to get bookstores to agree to sell them or whatever.
Which is difficult with a chapbook.
It sometimes is, but I feel like speaking from like experience with like Glass Buffalo.
Oh right, yeah. You have a chapbook.
Yeah, and like I think a lot of stores are very open to publishing that kind of material. I don't know too if it's because like Glass Buffalo already had a relationship as like a magazine publisher with these stores that they're like, okay, if you're also going to do a chapbook, it'll sell. But I find, I think sometimes people don't realize like those slightly like shady things that they say to you. But I remember I like had dropped off some like chapbooks at a store that like was like, oh yeah, like we want to fill ours up because like we sell them so much.
Yeah.
And like I had been like dropping off the new issue of the magazine, and they're like, oh well, we actually sell the chapbooks. And I feel like it's like they don't sell copies of the magazine in store, and like whereas like our chapbooks are quite popular and people will buy them in store.
Right.
And like most of the time, like most of our magazines just go to subscription.
Yeah.
I really like that idea of like kind of like a chapbook press also kind of borrowing the like magazine model to
I
send
think
that
it's...
out in that way. So. Because like why not be surprised? Like you're surprised the same way that you're just trusting.
I know. I feel like I'm gonna go subscribe.
Yeah, I think I probably will too.
It's pretty neat. Like it actually is. Some of it is just kind of new writers, and you know, and then you know Russell Thornton, for example. He's done a couple with them. For example, like there's a few quite established writers who publish there as well. So it's kind of neat. I'm honored to be in their company.
Yeah.
For sure.
But I'm interested to hear, we've talked a little bit about what you're writing right now and like what's sort of forthcoming for you. But what are you reading?
Oh.
Yeah. I've been, you know what, it's actually a tough question because I read quite a bit. I use books for different areas of my life. I have like train books, bed books, you know, that kind of stuff.
Yes.
I recently finished a book called Tree, A Life Story by David Suzuki and another author whose name I'm forgetting right now.
It's okay.
Well, yeah, shoot.
Suzuki sold the book anyways. Like
Yeah.
So
the poor other author will never be
No.
recognized.
It's okay.
anyway,
Did you like it?
It was really good.
Yeah.
It was the life cycle of Douglas fir tree from seed to the point that it's an old, like hundreds of years old, dead snag that eventually falls down, like the entire life of the tree. But then, so lots and lots of sort of scientific detail.
Yeah.
But then along the way, it talked about different, when the tree was this old, or when this was happening with the tree, this is what was happening in history. And so it kind of put it in the context of different historical events and scientific discoveries that were happening then. It was actually really well done. Like it was very interesting. It was, it's what David Suzuki does, right?
Yeah.
It's sort of communicating these complex scientific ideas in a very accessible way.
Yeah.
But it was actually really cool. It was very interesting.
I would be very interested in reading that.
It was neat, yeah. So I read that recently.
Very cool.
It's the only thing I can think of right now.
Okay.
Yeah.
Offhand.
That's good.
Oh, you only do like one book a month? So much shame.
Gee.
Yeah.
There's a couple people I know that like have, you know, they put book reading goals for the year, and they have like a goal of reading 300 books this year.
Wait,
and
how? Who?
I don't know how they do it, but I know a few people that have those goals, like they're in Goodreads, you know, that are, you know, my Goodreads
I know someone like that
friends.
as well.
Yeah, and I'm like, how on earth do you have the time to read a book, A? And I'm a quick reader, so I understand reading a book quickly, but even to absorb it, you know, like, but I feel like sometimes poetry is different, because reading a poetry book will take me a month, because I'll sit with one or two poems at a time, right? Or go back to it. I can't just sit and read.
Yeah, poetry's quite different that way, for sure.
Yeah. Yeah, you can't just sit spend an hour reading a poetry book. You have to kind of move in and out of it.
Yeah, sometimes, like I think like the better times when I'm like I read a lot of poetry collections that way, and then I'll just go back to them after.
Yes.
Like I was like, this is all marked up from like anything that I was like, oh, I need to read that poem a second time.
Yeah.
Like there's something else here that I think is going to come up further in the collection or something. So, but yeah, like I wonder, because I always see those people on Twitter that I think it's like the 96 books is the hashtag, and like actually accomplish reading that many books in a year. And like I feel good when I get 50, but it's been a while since I've done even 50, which maybe is just like shame on the podcast.
No, I don't think we're not going to shame each other.
No, but I mean, like, other people will shame us.
No,
it's
they
never.
won't.
It's never the shame in the room. It's the shame outside of the room that I'm afraid of.
I don't believe in anybody ever shaming anybody ever. I think you read what you what you're capable of reading at that time in your life, at that stage or that moment, and you know, and you can enjoy literature in other ways.
Yeah.
Right?
I'm waiting.
Like going to a poetry reading, hear people reading to you from their work.
Yeah.
Yeah. No shaming.
No shaming. Do you hear that? No one at me on Twitter.
I don't want to have any ats.
No ats.
No hashtags.
No hashtags. We're not for that. Except you can follow us on Twitter.
Oh,
at let's _lit.
Oh, you did not just...
Of course I did. You can do it at any point during the podcast.
Okay, you plugged.
You can trim it at any point too.
Oh my gosh. Well, I feel like because we were just talking about listening to someone read, that maybe we could have, that was a good segue. Maybe we could ask Kelly to read our first poem of the evening for us.
Yeah.
And so the poem is called Listen, Says the Sea Within You.
I've gotten in the habit of reading a couple of these, because I just did some readings in BC and stuff. I don't necessarily always read the whole poems. I have sort of like the book version and then a reading version, if that makes sense.
Oh.
So basically for this poem, I don't read this page. But I could. I don't have a good reason for that. I just stopped there and was like, that sounded okay. I'm just going to stop there.
I think that's really interesting how poets choose to read their work when they're performing it rather than on
the experience of somebody reading it.
Yeah.
I just wanted to say that because then if you're following along or whatever and you're going, what's he doing?
Yeah.
You read it wrong or something.
Kelly doesn't know how long the poems are.
Next page. Turn the page. Turn the page.
So, okay.
Okay.
Anyway, that's my preface, I guess.
Okay,
Yeah.
no, I think
so.
Yeah.
Read it how you prefer.
Read it how you prefer.
I'll say one more thing too. Just this first line about tattoo parlors and bookstores.
Yeah.
Since I wrote that, there is what used to be a bookstore in Old Strathcona has just recently, and was vacant for a long time, but it had a book sign for years and years, has just recently become a tattoo place.
Isn't that interesting?
So that was just funny when I saw that. I was like, wow. So
your fault.
I did that.
You started it.
It was wrong of me. Okay, so this is called Listen, Says the Sea Within You. And it begins with a quote, an epigraph from Paul Shepard, who is sort of an environmental philosopher, I guess. Birds become ideas. They flit through consciousness, connecting with this twig and that branch, are attended to momentarily and in a flash are gone. Birds are not like ideas. That is a literary simile. They are ideas. Tattoo parlors make more money than bookstores. Leaves are louder if you hear them while you are under the ground. To learn their own language, black-billed magpies listen to the toothed edges of fallen gold and brown elm leaves not yet dry, a vocabulary we cannot know. Music the human ear can barely guess at. Do we love the rain, then, because it is not silent? When it rains, we feel in our bones that the rain forgives us. We need this to be true. But falling rain is also easier to hear if you're listening from below. An elm tree greater than 102 centimeters in diameter can be worth as much as $65,000, says Edmonton. Does every raindrop hold a memory? Whose? We dream when we sleep. Magpies dream when they fly in the rain. We might not always remember, but every one of our dreams is about either leaves or feathers. The connection is that strong. When magpies dig in the leaves, they are not looking for food. They have chosen their ground carefully. Each returns to the place where it first emerged.
Wow. I really enjoy listening to you read. I think you have a lovely way of reading. You have a really lovely cadence even, how your pauses, and I feel like I'm leaning forward when I'm listening to you, kind of waiting for the next thought or moment to come.
Thank you. Thanks.
This is a moment where we just kind of were like, oh, here's the poet's ego, and they'll just keep stroking it. I'm doing a hand stroking. No, but I mean like, just like Kelly seems like he's like not prepared for it yet. Where he's like,
not.
oh, I'm a guest on a podcast.
Just wait till you read the second poem. What I'm gonna throw at you.
Yeah, Rain has a lot of thoughts. Yeah. There's parts like there's kind of like several parts to like kind of the question that I want to get at, and like I feel disordered in like the so many different thoughts that I have about what's going on in Insomnia Bird, but I feel like the most like obvious place to start, and this is like a two-parter in ways, is that like, you know, we focus on the bird and like the magpie on the cover, and so before I kind of say like what I see going on with birds, I want to ask you if you could talk about the figures of the various birds that are in the collection, the magpie, the owls, the crows, and maybe what you think their relationship is with the poetry.
Well, that quote that I just read, the Paul Shepard line where birds are ideas, right? It's not a simile. They're not like ideas. They actually are ideas. Like their behavior, their... a religious person would say a bird is the thought of God, for example.
Oh my.
Something like that, right? Like it's not metaphorical. It's not being literary and clever. It actually is a thing. Like it just is that. Sort of what he was getting at, I think. And I really like that idea, that the thing for its own sake, like on the surface, is a thing. And people since, you know, prehistoric times have had these great sort of symbolism, basically symbols from the natural world in animals. The earliest human art is animals, and animals would be sort of messenger type figures, right? And so on and so on. It's a really huge topic, obviously, but so some of it is that trying to tap into that kind of idea of that it's not just sort of landscaping, or it's not just this background distraction or something, but it is this very deep sort of part of our reality and part of us, right? Like part of who we are. So that's part of it, for sure. And then in Edmonton, of course, a lot of them there is a big black-billed magpie population here.
Yeah.
I've sort of looked at it as kind of the muse, or kind of the spirit of the place kind of idea. Like there's sort of this representative animal of Edmonton. In my mind, I think a lot of people would probably.
I think many will agree with you.
Yeah. Like them or hate them, right? Not everyone likes them, but then also there is a lot of symbolic, and you know, there's a lot of things you can do with it. Like birds are sort of like angels, if you want to look at it one way. They're also, you know, pigeons, which come up a few times actually. There's a bunch of pigeons. Are these kind of unwanted? People call them flying rats, like they're kind of these, or winged rats or whatever. They're garbage eaters. They're, the way they're treated perhaps might not be too different from the way homeless people are treated in a city, for example, right? There's some of these kind of connections. Wild birds versus totally urban wildlife birds.
Yeah.
I don't mean versus like they're two opposing forces or something, but something like a pileated woodpecker or a great horned owl that we'll see in the city, but it's like a visitor almost from another place, versus magpies who literally dwell here. Right. So there's all these different. That's a partial answer, anyway.
Yeah, no, and like that's a really good start, because like it even lets me like ask my further part of the question, because the thing that I started to notice, and like I did a lot of like late night poetry readings of this collection, which always just affects like how I read poems, because I start to notice things differently, maybe like because I'm a little bit tired, maybe we've had like already a drink already, but I was interested in the way that I seem to notice that birds became observers in a lot of the poems, and they seem to stand as like judges to human actions and behavior. There was just like a line, I think I wrote down like page 29 in one of the poems, where, you know, you are the crows who like it even less than I do. And like cultural Darwinism for dummies, there was another line about these owls that like get erected to statues that can kind of look over buildings and whatnot. So I was curious to hear like kind of the relationship between birds and humans in maybe ways that you maybe think that we should be learning from them or like noticing what they're observing.
Yeah, part of it as well with the magpie in particular, but other birds too, is that it's sort of the muse, or kind of a, I don't think I use the word trickster in the book, but sort of a trickster figure perhaps.
Mm-hmm.
But somebody who is observing, like the magpie's eye is often like it's the magpie gaze type thing, where look what humans are doing, or listen to this noise, or this type of thing. So sort of from the bird's point of view is kind of, so I did try that as well. You're right. There's a bit of that we have been found wanting, right? That magpies are looking at us, and we're supposed to be the noisy pests,
right?
But look how you guys are behaving.
Right, that's what
type
they're
thing.
kind of saying.
Something like that.
Yeah.
Well, and as their numbers grow, then maybe their next move is a war.
Well, the birds are going to take over.
Yeah,
they are. I mean, that's
Alfred
common
told us
knowledge.
that.
Yeah, that's been established.
Yes.
I'm ready for it.
Yeah.
I'm comfortable with that.
Well, really, you're comfortable with it? Like,
I'm tired of being in charge. Like let the birds have their mortgages and drive their cars. I don't know what society they build. It would probably be completely different.
I think you've just given Kelly another poem there. Driving the cars.
You need to credit me on that one.
Okay, I will.
I'm gonna take that.
Yeah. I mean, we're giggling, but you're very playful in your form, particularly with the kind of choose your own adventure poem on page 30 in the book. So how did you decide what poems, or how do you decide what poems will work best this way? And is it the sort of poem that was built specifically for a collection, or do you just
that one, the choose your own adventure one?
Yeah.
A lot of it is sort of self-referential in that there's sort of forms that you should fill out, or instructions like see step 3, or right, some of this kind of going for the corporate document or the sort of government documentation kind of form, which is often baffling and sort of confusing, but also kind of easy to make fun of, I guess.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
And then the choose your own adventure one, it's just I don't know exactly how to explain that. It was originally longer. That's the cut version.
Okay.
There was originally a whole bunch more options, but it was a little bit much, I think. But just that's another example of sort of looking at things from on one level, just like if you're a pigeon and you approve of the, however it goes, the installation of spikes designed to prevent your perching. And then it directs you to other poems. And those poems are about how people are misplaced. Right? So it's sort of this. Because we have all of these weird, cruel things, right? These spiky things and stuff to keep birds from perching. But then we also treat each other that way, too.
Yeah.
There's literally architecture with spikes.
I think you can do it in on private builded stuff. I don't know if the city can. But I just remember I think there was conversation on the condo board for my condo, and I feel like there was just a particular spot that pigeons perch, and they were like, oh, we should put up these spikes for it. And I was
I'm not referencing pigeons. We're talking about where they were actually putting on benches to stop
people from loitering.
Oh, I thought we were doing both. Okay, never mind. Sorry.
It kind of is both.
Well, they are kind of both. I think that's what Kelly's saying.
One is pointing to the other, I guess.
Right, I forgot that. Okay,
so it's kind of like making a...
I had a little bit of wine, okay? And then I forgot I didn't have the entire compendium of the history of the world in my mind. What were we discussing? Well, that question is
the
just
playfulness in Kelly's form. But it's playful, but it's also, speaking to these really deep, kind of dark parts of humanity, but in this form that is, at times playful, at times where you're kind of saying, oh, did I read what I thought I read there? Very questioning even within the poem itself. So I think, the collection itself is very unique in the way that you kind of flow through those questions, or the way that you come at them.
I think, two things. I thought of two things.
Okay.
I'm quite inspired by the writer Kurt Vonnegut. although he doesn't write poetry. He uses humor, like just bizarre, a lot of very absurdist kind of humor. And you almost can't help but laugh or wonder, what's even happening. But he's using that to discuss some really difficult and tragic sort of historical things or difficult situations and so on. And so I think the way that humor, the way that a funny joke can kind of jar you, like it kind of makes your mind do something, right? You have to do this sort of leap almost.
Yeah.
Shocking things do that too. And poetry does that, right? Like that's sort of what poetry does, is make this sort of, your imagination has to do some kind of jump in some way, right? Like some kind of, so I think humor and using humor for non-humorous purposes and stuff, that's sort of what I'm going for, I guess. And I hope it's successful at least some of the time. But then also one more thing, just while I have this in my mind, because it will not last long. The weaving thing, right? The sort of magpie nest metaphor is kind of a part of it too. Is that deliberately making this tangled sort of thing of like, it's asymmetrical and it may be kind of messy and whatever, but that's sort of how a magpie builds their nest. And so it's kind of like, it's a magpie nest but built out of chunks of words and text, and that's sort of the image, the metaphor I was working with.
Yeah, I can see it as soon as you say it out loud.
That's the opening quote about of
that's
the epigraph right at the very beginning, which was, "And of these one and all I weave the song of myself." Magpie on nest building. It's actually from Walt Whitman.
Oh, okay.
And I do give him credit at the back.
What was interesting, like just even talking about the entanglement, and like now I'm starting to even see more parallels with like the bureaucracy and the necessity of like mentioning bureaucracy in different moments in the book, and similar to like what you just noted with how many things are referenced at the back.
Yeah.
Can you walk us through a little bit of your process for writing many of the poems in the collection? Because particularly how a lot of found texts work their way just into texts, and like and just some of the titles are just but even just like the one that I thought about a lot was the "We Don't Want McDonald's" at Heritage Days, and then the poem seems to be about something very different, but still like it's just like things that you've heard other people in Edmonton saying, or how you kind of decide on that and work with the
it was a lot of fun, and it was a really big process too. Basically, it started out as a really huge manuscript that was unwieldy and was going kind of nowhere at first. But I was working with a BC writer and editor named Harold Renish.
Oh, yeah.
Who's been here at the Edmonton
Harold's
Poetry
come
Festival
to the Poetry
before.
Festival a couple of years ago.
He and I kind of came up with this sort of as part of this ongoing conversation. We need to introduce, he said, more randomness. We need to have more play. Talking about all these serious things, and it's too, we need more kind of. And so I started collecting. I had already been doing this anyway, but I just started compiling this huge collection of found text and quotes from the bus and from websites and just from all over the place, Edmonton stuff. And then also randomly generating lines using often Edmonton related things, but literally just kind of like random phrases and stuff. And then a lot of the result was a huge list, and a lot of them didn't make the cut, basically. Yeah. But a lot of those got kind of shuffled in and became titles, first lines, last lines, and sort of shuffled it. But then it couldn't just be totally. I wasn't going for total Dadaist, surreal, like just throw it at the wall and see what happens. It still had to fit a little bit, at least.
Yeah.
So shuffle it, but then kind of play with it a little bit. So it was random-ish.
Wow,
I guess.
What a unique
process. So it was a lot of fun. It was a big job.
Yeah.
And then the publisher accepted it, and even then it was a huge unwieldy thing that needed to be.
Even after accepting, And so how long did it take you to write this collection then?
Some of the poems were already in existence years before. And so So that's a little bit hard.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah, I mean, we don't always know that we're writing a collection.
And some of the poems were literally lifted from previous stuff of mine, like some earlier chapbook, for example. Poems were taken out of there and just kind of revamped or put through that process for this book. So several years in the making, if you want to look at it that way. Yeah. Quite a few years, I guess.
Very interesting. Okay. So I think right now we'll maybe have you read another poem for everybody before we jump into the larger context of the discussion. And we're also going to have a wine top up.
Yeah.
Because our glasses are getting low.
Thank you.
Look at that, was loud in my...
It's the sound that everybody wants to hear, though. We're making people thirsty when it goes. Beautiful.
There we go. Okay. Kelly, can you carry us on with the poem?
Yep. So Janus, I don't know if a lot of people are familiar with him. I've also heard it pronounced Janus. But anyway.
Yeah.
The Roman god of, see if I can get this right, of doorways, of beginnings, sort of new beginnings. So he was the god of the new year, associated with any kind of opening or new beginning type thing. Okay. So that's where we get the word January, for example, the new year, and also janitor, like the person who would open the doors in the morning. That's where we get the word janitor. So the god of doorways.
Okay.
Neat. I didn't know that one.
And so on. And also he's depicted, whenever you see him, as having two faces, or like two heads almost. He's looking both into the future and the past at the same time. So it's referencing that guy.
Okay.
But it's imagining him if that Roman god was on the streets in Edmonton, basically.
Okay.
So there's a bunch of references to him in those. Yeah. As we update the plan to end homelessness, we'd like your thoughts. This also begins with an epigraph from Emily McGiffin. He knows no remedy for the dark birds circling his mind. Things are alive only to the degree that their bodies are porous. These questions explore demographics, the minivan's liturgy, the hockey card tarot, and you, Janus, stuttering god of gates and doorways. After all these years, you still stand and blink when one is closed in your face. The fear of nature is also nature, and you never seem to know if you're coming or going. You walk in two directions and argue with yourself, your hair going one way, your beard another. Blown by a scorching wind that no one feels, you rock and twist from side to side, staring unblinking at the heavens and shouting, pointing with broken fingernails at something beneath Jasper Avenue. Your right hand might literally not know what your left is doing. Does one shake an empty paper Tim Hortons cup? Do you totter cigarette butt to bottle cap, some days never even touching the ground? Do you sleep standing in archways? Are your dusty shoes signs in the desert, pointing the way to two distant cities, anchored by Gasoline Alley? Tell us about yourself. Some part of your madness must be a lingering fear of the new year, the danger of freezing to death. You look into the future and into the past we can see, but it would be wrong to say your eyes gaze wildly in two directions at once. No. Your eyes are the only level and steady thing about you. It is everyone else who turns and looks aside. Frustrated by how long this light takes to change? Call 311 or submit a report online.
Yeah, and how, the last two lines there are so almost like these random, completely unexpected, a completely random, unexpected ending to that poem, and yet it works so well with, as you say, weaving it through almost like the magpie nest.
Mm-hmm. But yeah, there feels like a real sense to both the beginning and the ending, and like even just like the frustrated, or like what are we irrationally frustrated about. And I wanted talking different orders, but now I'm just going to jump around with all the questions. So hopefully,
Yeah, I do want to just say before you do that though that the first line in this poem, like it grabs you right from the very, very beginning. That things are alive only to the degree that their bodies are porous. I mean, that line just pulled me in immediately. Yeah.
I guess I'm wondering too if there's relevancy to this question too, like based on our earlier conversation, because you've kind of already gotten at it a little bit, but there's a lot of humor in these poems, and they're poking fun at bureaucracy and a lot of maybe some of the inefficacy of some of the solutions that cities and civilizations come up with to manage and run society, and in their attempts to sort of solve social issues such as homelessness. And I'm kind of wondering, what effect do you think that the humor in some of these poems do in either maybe like solving or acknowledging these issues, or what's I feel like that's like kind of like one of the greater works or messages that like a lot of these poems are doing, and I want you to kind of just talk on it.
Yeah, that is a good question. I did mention a little bit about humor, just that it sort of has this effect of, or it can, sort of this almost jarring effect in a way, which can be positive or negative. I think a lot of things like homelessness, for example, we are blind to them, even though they're right in front of us. We just sort of, we turn away, right? Like we have this kind of built-in thing. We all do it, right? Like I've done it myself, and I'm not proud of it, but just sort of walk by another human being who needs help, and just sort of, I don't see that person. I'm just walking. I'm busy, right? Like we just have this weird dehumanizing kind of tendency. We just do. And some people more than others and so on. But as a society, I think it would be fair to say that we do, right? And I think all the political slogans in the world, and I think all the statistics or studies in the world won't change that. Because we already have all of that, right? We have how many committees and statistics and everything on this stuff. So I don't think that's going to make people see. But I think maybe being jarred in some way. For example, a weird joke that's like, huh? What? Like, I never looked at it that way.
Right.
Kind of idea. That's a little bit what I'm going for, is this idea of trying to see something in a new way that can be a funny joke, but it can also be something that, wow, I should actually look at that, because that's messed up. I shouldn't be looking away from that, or something.
Right.
And I think there's a lot of power in that final line where it's like, if you're frustrated by a light not changing, just call 311 the same way that you can call this number if you see a homeless person passed out, or just how we're treating both of those things in the same way, or like, here's a survey that's going to help end homelessness.
Right.
And so.
Well, and I mean, even just as we've mentioned a few times jokingly on the podcast, it is incredibly cold these days right now. I mean, minus 39, and it has been, kind of plastered all over social media and the news that if you see someone, if you see a homeless person on, struggling or in need of help right now, to call 311. And it is kind of almost like this. You can remove yourself from actually being I don't know how to say it properly, but it almost gives you that permission, that built-in permission to keep walking by, but I'm going to dial 311 on my phone, so it's okay,
By creating some of these systems, I think we're removing that social responsibility on the personal responsibility on someone.
It becomes kind of a bureaucratic process.
Right.
The same way as, like, there's a pothole in my back alley. Can someone please come and fill it or whatever? Like, it just becomes this, okay, fill out this form, we'll get back to you, or whatever. And that's sort of how we would treat it. I'm not saying we should, burn it all down or something.
No, and thank goodness that there are those programs in place to be able to, I certainly don't want to bash that either, but it is interesting how humanity kind of shifts in its evolution of how we treat each other. Yeah.
And I mean, sort of on this continued theme of bureaucracy and other things that you're talking about, and suburban sprawl in the collection, can you talk a little bit more about the specifics of writing poetry so rooted in Edmonton in this place, and what things you've been wanting to highlight or showcase about it, and I guess the critiques too?
Yeah, I I came upon a sort of a concept a few years ago that really stuck with me, and it's called shadow geography, and that's really what I'm doing here. It's sort of what is hidden or what is repressed about a place, and you can almost look at it in like the psychological sense, like the shadow, right? The Jungian sense. The shadow is that part of us that we don't even want to acknowledge, or maybe we can't acknowledge, so we just push it down in some way. It's kind of that part, but for a place. So it's the dirty secrets or the skeletons in the closet. It's what will not appear in the tourist brochures, right? It's not the nice looking stuff in the public art and so that's why things like homelessness, urban wildlife, like just some of these, they're equally part of our reality, but they're kind of, we just don't want to talk about them necessarily, or so that's, I feel like I've lost track a little bit of your question though on this. Sorry.
Well, yeah, and I guess like just the things that you're talking about, rooting them in Edmonton.
Right. Sorry. Okay.
Yeah, no, you're doing great.
I'm almost half finished this water, so
yeah, so much water.
So
much water being drank.
So really specifically, like sort of a study of Edmonton. Like I would always have a notebook in my pocket, like constantly, and just be taking notes and copying stuff down, like signs and etc. images. So sort of like an anthropological study almost, or something like that, of Edmonton. And it was a decision to be very Edmonton, like should it be just kind of a generic city, or should it be really super Edmonton focused? And I chose the Edmonton one just because it's like, I don't know, it seems more powerful to be really, really local and really specific and sort of regional.
Yeah. And it is an interesting choice, because often I think there's a push to be less specific about location and place when you're looking at having work published, right? So that it's, the broader the place, or the broader the location, the more broad of a audience you may have. So you've kind of gone the other way.
Yeah.
Yeah. And yet you've still found obviously you've still found a broad audience with it.
I hope it reaches a large audience. I've been lucky to do some readings in a few different places and stuff.
But it's a Saskatoon publisher, so it's not, it's not like you only found a publisher in the location of the book. It still has and I think maybe a lot of cities speak to some of these topics, regardless of whether it's Edmonton or Regina or whatever the case.
Yeah, for sure. And I almost see it as a very Western Canadian project, like a Saskatoon publisher. My editor is from BC, and then it's about Edmonton, right? So it's this very sort of, we could probably all relate in some level, whether you're from Winnipeg or,
Well, I don't know Winnipeg. I don't know about those Winnipeg folks.
Winnipeg. They're probably just as cold as us tonight.
I think they're colder.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think so.
Yeah.
Oops. Sorry, Winnipeg.
Sorry, Winnipeg.
I also feel like I'm not entirely answering your question, though. Sorry. I feel like I'm circling around your question, but I'm not really.
Well, I mean, do you have a more specific answer that you want to...
No, not really. I'm apologizing for not having...
I'm just saying, you put Edmonton Poems as the subtitle.
You did.
On the text.
Yeah.
Why, Kelly?
Yeah. Okay.
Well, he's getting deep.
This is good. That was helpful. We consume culture from elsewhere most of the time, right? We watch nothing against Americans, but we watch American television and read American stuff, and mostly American.
Yeah.
And the UK and other cities. A lot of people probably are very familiar with Central Park in New York City.
Right.
Just from movies, from never even being there themselves, right? This is a big part of us as Canadians, is this sort of weird imported. It has to be in a place like London or Paris for it to be a good story, right? We have this sort of weird, it's part of maybe the Canadian stereotype of us having a poor self-esteem or something. Or, I'm not sure. But anyway.
Yeah.
So it seems like for places to really be places, like to have their own arts and culture and to recognize themselves as themselves, there needs to be things like, a show about Edmonton, a Netflix series based in Edmonton. An
it.
Edmonton superhero. I don't know.
Yes.
Right? Like, we need to see our own places in our entertainment, not just...
Yeah.
See, that's my sermon. That was
it's
a sermon.
perfect.
Yeah.
It was wonderful.
And I mean, Rand and I can relate to that.
Yeah.
As two people who are doing a podcast mostly about
Yeah. That's why we
Edmonton.
chose.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's
Yeah,
why we
yeah.
chose
It's exactly
to,
the same.
to specifically focus on primarily poets in Alberta.
Mm-hmm.
Because there are so many wonderful poets here that are not recognized elsewhere, because if you're not from a place like Toronto or Vancouver or New York, you know, the big names, you often are just kind of, you know, looked past, glossed over. But yeah, there's some really great stories and storytellers that should be showcased.
Yeah, exactly.
That was my sermon.
Yeah, no,
Yeah.
we're all part of it.
Good.
I'm gonna like invite Kelly to maybe take a step into another sermon.
Oh.
Because this is perhaps like a little bit harder of a question, but you know, people who read and experience your poetry, what work do you think that like people and citizens like that should do in their lives? How do you hope it'll kind of maybe shift them in terms of like political engagement, or what are things that after having read Insomnia Bird that they should be taking from it to do?
I think part of it is just noticing, right? It's just maybe sort of awareness. I'm not saying I'm like some sort of super aware person or something either, but I think the process of deliberately walking around with a notebook and trying to document really, really sort of small details for months, for a year, quite a long period of time, made me realize there's so many interesting things and we don't notice them, right? We just we just take them for granted. So maybe even just that people would just notice stuff around us, right? Notice, like, look at the trees. Look at the trees around us, for example.
Yeah.
They're in here quite a bit, right? The Edmonton's sort of big collection of American elms. It's fantastic. Like, it's just beautiful. It sort of makes the city almost a museum or something. But we just like drive by them or walk by them and don't really think about it. But at the same time, it's not an ideal situation because machine noises are keeping the magpie awake, or right, there's these different sort of distractions and bright lights, and so
What
all
is
of
it-
those things combined with the kind of the randomness of the the poem and the words and the lines mixed together. Yeah.
Yeah, and well, I'm like wondering to take it to like a next step though. Is sort of like, what is it about like the poetic form and like poetry itself that calls you to like use your voice in that way in terms of like instead of like, you know, some of these things that could be like, oh, I could just write a rant to like a letter to the editor about how I feel about homelessness and how it's dealt with in the city, or you know, there's other forms, and so why poetry?
I think it's the best. I think it's the best form for trying to do a whole bunch of things at the same time. I think a letter to the editor can only do one thing, probably. And again, like I said, with statistics or political screeds or whatever, might not even do it that effectively necessarily. Whereas I think something like poetry, which enables you to move in and out of voices, move in and out of different perspectives, use rhythm sometimes, or use sound sometimes, use visual imagery sometimes, right? Like it's a much more engaging form. In general, right? That's sort of poetry overall. I think it's just capable of a lot more. Touching people, like touching, sort of grabbing your attention or your emotions or something in a way that, again, maybe just an essay necessarily might not be able to do. Or maybe some... That's my answer for now. I
think it's a good answer. Yeah.
We're asking you to defend yourself as a poet, or else we'll make you pull the card out of your wallet, and we have a large pair of scissors that we can snip with the card into three pieces.
My poet ID.
Yeah.
Right.
And then we feed it to the magpies.
Oh, because they would put it in their nest.
Yeah, they would put it in their nest.
Line their nest. Actually, that's really a pretty visual. Like,
not for Kelly.
It's a little bit sad for me.
No,
but otherwise, otherwise it's nice.
think the idea of like pages from books as a lining for a magpie nest, the visual of that to me, I was really like, I feel like would be a beautiful visual.
I was thinking more that like magpies build their nests from like dying poets' dreams. You know, like every poem that never was, a magpie has stolen it and put it in their
I have a
nest.
whole cupboard full of those.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think we all do.
Yeah.
That's pretty neat, actually. That's a neat image.
Yeah.
It's like this sort of bleak. It would have to be like a skeletal bird or something. It would have to be some kind of a land of the dead.
Something that's going on. But I'm like, that's like what happens when it's like, you know, a glass and a half of Cab Franc, and I'm like, here's what I think of my career right now.
Well, and even as you're saying that, Kelly's previous book, Shift, does have the bird and the skeleton. You like birds, Kelly. Both of your books have birds on the cover.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I don't know what to say.
Was that planned? Was that planned?
Not really.
Oh.
That book was designed by the publisher. I think it's beautiful. I love that cover.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But I didn't choose the image at all. Whereas this one, I was much more involved in the process of this cover.
Okay.
So it's...
Okay.
There's a theme, though.
Random.
I mean, there's birds in both books, I guess, but...
Randomness finds its way. So, Kelly, would you like to maybe share another poem with us? And Matthew and I were thinking the poem that we'd love to have you read is actually the last poem in the collection, and it's called Who's Not Here?
Who's not here? They perch at the tops of trees, which is a means of visually establishing their territory, the equivalent of other bird species' songs. The province of Alberta has completed a functional planning study. Over 3 kilometers of ultimate freeway alignment. Park people. Always begin with asking, who's not here? And, while parks can be welcoming to everyone, they are not socially neutral places. The grind and thunder of bulldozers frightens coots, flattens trees, erasing what was here before, erasing the possibility of remembering it. An economy jumps, an urban center doubles its size. A workforce is employed. Everyone rushes to finish before winter. Park people. There are too many community gardens in the world. With something like dignity, Canada geese leave their unquiet fields and endangered ponds to fly south. Our quality of life is measured in square footage, horsepower, flat screen inches. In exchange for these things, a city auctions off its own memories. Exposed clay and rubber tire-colored night gives way to another sunrise, dark, yellow, and dusty. Earth movers and dump trucks. Are you sure those LED billboards are bright enough?
I feel like that poem is, really when we were reading earlier on about how they say, the publisher was saying how the book is, at times kind of judging of Edmonton, or I don't think judging is the right word, but I feel like this poem is really that.
It's pretty...
That's
critical, isn't
pretty
it?
critical. But at the same time, I'm nodding and kind of with you the whole time as you're reading it. Yeah, like how auctioning off our own memories, and there are too many community gardens in the world. Now, was that particular line a found line?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, they're from websites and stuff. They would be cited in there.
Okay. Oh, so they are cited
somewhere.
at the back of the book.
I believe, yeah.
Yeah.
It should be.
Yeah.
Yeah, so some of just some bizarre
and
stuff. But
what made you decide to make this the last poem of the book? Was it a conscious decision?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It, like I said, it was a big process putting this together, and that wasn't going to be the first. They were shuffled around a little bit.
Yeah.
It ties together a bunch of the different themes, I think,
Mm-hmm.
which is sort of urban sprawl and the effect on wildlife. I mean, magpies aren't mentioned, but coots and Canada geese and so on, like just habitat.
Yeah.
And then kind of the recurring imagery throughout of magpie, sort of birds in general, being affected by noise and being affected by lights and so on.
Mm-hmm.
The last line about the LED billboards, right?
Yeah.
It's just this, because those are crazy, aren't they?
They
like,
are crazy.
It's like, it is as bright as daylight out here.
Yeah.
And it's the middle of the night, but I'm looking at a big Samsung ad or whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah, I as I was reading it though, I was going, oh, jeez, like this is pretty critical. Whoops.
Well, maybe you should have thought about before the book came out.
I guess so. It's too late now though.
No, but I mean, I think as I've often said, as poets, that's part of the job of a poet, is to critique and to question and to ask, how can we be different? And I mean, really, this whole book is that, in my opinion.
Yeah. Well, one thing
Yeah.
I want to mark that I just find so interesting too is that the Choose Your Own Adventure poem that we had talked about earlier, that only appears on like page 30 of the collection. The first thing that it says is, if you think the construction of that tower is an encroachment on previous city planning commitments, please skip ahead to page 100. Yeah. So, just if you have that thought, don't bother reading this book, and just go to the very,
last
It takes you to the very last poem.
And it takes you to the last.
Yeah.
I didn't catch on to that, Matthew.
That's what the work that I do when I read a
Look
collection.
at you.
I
Nice.
follow the Choose Your Own Adventure poems.
Nice.
I do
well
that
done.
first, so I was just I wanted to see what poems you were leading people to, and I find
Yeah. So it's like,
so that poem is leading people to the different pages in the.
it is.
In the
They're
collection.
specifically about those topics.
Okay, everybody, read that poem.
For sure. So yeah, that one's sort of like, you can just skip this whole book.
yeah.
You've
got all the knowledge that Kelly Shepard has. Yeah, you don't have to.
I've nothing
Yeah.
more for you. Just go to the end.
Wow.
So
Very, very cool.
So I like that.
Okay.
Well,
thank you.
Mm-hmm.
in terms of takeaways and everything that's going on with this book, what do you hope people take away most from it if they did read all of the pages before page 100?
Let's end with that
That's
big
a big
question.
that is a big question.
Matthew's smirking.
What did they take away?
Maybe I am that.
Sheesh. I mean, part of it is the noticing thing that I already mentioned before, just to sort of maybe pay more attention to things around. I mean, you know what? On one level, I don't want to be telling people to do anything. Like, it isn't meant to be a lesson or a sermon. Like, there's not, the moral of the story is, if you're honest, you'll have a happy life or whatever. Like, it isn't meant to be a teaching moment.
Yeah.
Some of it is just meant to be, you just get lost in this tangle, right? Like, there's this big kind of, sometimes funny, sometimes jarring, some very sad things, but some very beautiful things. Mm-hmm. And it's all just kind of woven together. And we're in it.
Yeah.
That's kind of what it is, right? More than an actual takeaway. It's just kind of trying to capture that, I think.
Realizing the tangle and surviving it.
Yeah.
That we're in it. I like that a lot. Yeah. Okay.
That's a good thing.
It's a great thing. I think that's maybe a really powerful way to end it.
Yeah.
All right. So this is a poem that was mentioned earlier. I don't want to say too much about it, but it's one of the stories happened to my parents, and one of the stories happened to a guy that my dad knew in my hometown. So I grew up hearing both of these stories, and I just put them together to make this poem. So it's a true story, but not exactly as it appears here. But
Okay.
I've also changed the names of people in this poem.
Okay.
It's called Ed Rempel's Dog. Here's something. Remember Ed Rempel's dog? Big German Shepherd? Well, I was at the Hudson with Alvin earlier today, and Ed comes in. Pretty shaken up. Turns out some of his chickens had taken to roosting in the hog barn on the backs of the pigs. I don't know, maybe trying to stay warm? Anyways, come morning, there were no more chickens. It's not like those pigs go hungry. They get all kinds of stuff on top of the regular feed. Small carrots from their garden, apple peels and cores from when Helen makes pies, you know. Ed practically spoils them. Anyway, bones and feathers and everything. The pigs ate them in the night. And those were some of his good laying hens. So old Ed was pretty mad. So he goes to teach those pigs a lesson. Rocky, that's the German Shepherd's name. He gets Rocky and puts him in the pig pen. Close the door to the barn so there's nowhere for them to run. He said he was thinking before he did it, I hope Rocky don't hurt those pigs too bad. He just wanted to put a scare into them. Then Ed had to drive down to Anderson's corner to pick something up, but he figured he wouldn't be longer than 10 minutes. The pig should still be okay in that little time. He was pretty mad though. But when Ed gets home, no Rocky. He thought maybe he jumped the fence and went back to the house or the cow barn, but Ed couldn't find him anywhere. He said he walked through the pig pen one more time and something caught his eye. A little patch of fur on the ground. It was Rocky's tail. Just his tail. That's all that was left. Can you believe that? That was a big dog. He had that dog for years too. Ed was pretty shaken up.
Gonna go to the bathroom and cry.
Oh, right? Like the poem is just so, it's so powerful in its, almost like in its simplicity, right? But it's so strong and powerful, and every time I'm like,
why did he think the dog would be fine? And so
why did he think the dog would be fine?
this feels. I'm like, which part of these stories, like, which one are this story and which one's this story? But I was like, in what realm does like a bunch of pigs eat a bunch of chickens? And you're like, I'll just put something else in there that.
But I grew up on a farm as Kelly did, and so often, the farmer would be just like, oh, I'm gonna put the dog in there. He'll take care of those pigs. Not.
Did that happen every time to the dog though? Did anyone? Because like I just like.
And this is a true story, correct, Kelly?
Yeah. So the chickens one happened to my parents, from what I understand. Unrelated to the other one.
Yeah.
I've put them together here, but unrelated. Yes. So maybe logically, if that really happened to a person, they wouldn't do the other thing. I get that.
I feel like the farmer still would. I really do.
He was pretty choked, so I don't know. But anyway, then the other one, the dog one, is just a story I heard. It was about someone else. So that wasn't my own experience. It wasn't my dog.
Okay.
Okay. So thank you again, Kelly, for sharing all of the wonderful poems and your poetic process with us tonight, and also that final poem that may give me a couple of nightmares tonight.
A couple.
But yeah, this has been wonderful, and it's been a real pleasure sharing a bottle of wine and a bunch of poems with you tonight.
Thank you very much. It's been fun.
Yeah, we've enjoyed talking with you.
Thanks a lot.
Yeah. And we also want to thank Gurvinder Bhatia and the Writers Guild of Alberta for being amazing partners and supporters of the podcast, and
and also to keep up to date on the podcasts, we implore you to follow us on Twitter at @lets_lit, and subscribe and listen to the podcast at audioboom.com and more places where you listen to your favorite podcasts.
Yes. And shall we have a cheers to end the evening?
That sounds lovely.
Cheers.